The morning light fell through the white curtains like a promise that refused to fade. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, wearing a crisp white shirt and black trousers, staring at the tie in his hands. His fingers trembled as he tried to loop it, but he couldn't stop thinking, "This is the last morning I'll ever wake up as just me." His best man, Ryan, leaned against the doorway, holding 2 coffee cups. "You look like a man about to be executed," he teased with a smirk. Ethan forced a small laugh, taking the cup. "Feels like it, honestly. I didn't sleep. My head's been spinning all night." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Cold feet." Ethan shook his head. "No. Just you know how when something feels too perfect, your brain starts finding ways to ruin it." Ryan chuckled. "Bro, you're marrying Anna. She's the calmest, kindest person I've ever met. If anyone was built for you, it's her." Ethan looked out the window. The sky was bright, cloudless, wedding perfect. "Yeah," he said softly. "She's everything." The venue was an old countryside chapel, surrounded by oak trees that whispered with the wind. Inside, the decorators moved like quiet bees, setting flowers, fixing lights, humming under their breath. Ethan stood at the altar as the guests filled the pews, one by one, their murmurs echoing in the high ceiling. His mother adjusted his boutonniere and smiled, trying to hide her tears. "You look so much like your father did on our wedding day." Ethan smiled weakly. "I hope I look a little less nervous." "You look in love," she whispered. "That's all that matters." As the music began to play softly in the background, Ethan's heart pounded. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle, one by one, pastel dresses flowing like spring. Ryan stood by his side, straight and proud. Everyone turned their heads toward the back of the chapel. But Anna didn't appear. The music looped once, twice. Guests shifted in their seats, whispering. The priest glanced at Ethan, uncertain. Ryan leaned closer. "Relax. Maybe she's fixing her veil or something." Ethan nodded, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes locked on the door, waiting. Minutes passed. The music stopped. The silence grew thick. Then the door opened. Anna's maid of honor, Claire, stepped in, pale as snow, holding a small white envelope. She walked down the aisle slowly, her eyes never meeting Ethan's. When she reached him, she didn't say a word. She just held out the envelope, her lips trembling. The world around Ethan blurred. He took the envelope. On it, in her delicate handwriting, was written, "For Ethan." "Before I say I do." His breath caught. He turned toward the priest, toward Ryan, toward his mother. Everyone was silent, watching. He stepped away from the altar, out the side door, into the small garden behind the chapel. The sound of birds felt cruelly peaceful. His fingers tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter, neatly folded, the paper smelling faintly of roses, her perfume. He began to read. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't walk down that aisle. And before you hate me, please read until the end. I love you, I always have. That's what makes this so impossible to write. Last night, I sat by the window thinking about how perfect you looked when you fell asleep on the couch, half-dressed, your vows notebook still in your hand. You looked so peaceful, so sure about us. I wanted to feel that too, but something inside me kept whispering. What if you're marrying an idea, not me? I've tried to ignore that voice for months. I wanted to be the version of myself you fell in love with. The one who laughs at your bad jokes. The one who paints in the mornings while you make coffee. But somewhere along the way I lost her. And I'm terrified that once we sign those papers, you'll realize it too." Ethan's vision blurred. His hands shook as he turned the letter over. You deserve someone who doesn't have to pretend to be okay. Someone who isn't haunted by what could have been. I thought love could fix that, but love isn't supposed to be a bandage, it's supposed to be a mirror. And right now, that mirror is showing me a version of myself that's scared, broken, and not ready. So I'm leaving Ethan. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I still do, too much to let you live a lie. Maybe one day, when I find myself again, I'll find you too. Until then, please remember me as the girl who loved you enough to walk away. Anna. The paper slipped from his hand. The sound of it hitting the grass felt louder than the world. He wanted to scream, to run, to find her. But he just stood there, staring at the letter as if the words might rewrite themselves if he waited long enough. Ryan found him a few minutes later. "Ethan," he started softly. Ethan turned, eyes red. "She's gone." Ryan looked down, saw the letter, and didn't ask questions. He just stood beside him, silent. The crowd inside was beginning to whisper. People leaving, others comforting his mother. "I don't know what I did wrong," Ethan muttered, voice hollow. "I thought we were happy." Ryan exhaled. "Sometimes people love us, man, but they can't stay. It's not about us." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Then why does it feel like it is?" He crumpled the letter in his fist, then immediately smoothed it out again. Like it was something sacred he wasn't allowed to destroy. That night, the reception hall stayed empty. The flowers wilted under dim light, untouched food sat cold on the tables, and the wedding cake stood uncut, a monument to something that never happened. Ethan sat alone in his suit, the tie still loose around his neck, staring at the single candle flickering on the table. The DJ had left, the guests had gone. Only the echo of laughter that never came remained. He pulled out the letter again, reading it for the 100th time. His eyes stopped at the words, "Maybe one day." He whispered to himself, "There won't be a one day, Anna." His voice cracked. "You were it." The candle burned lower. The wedding that never happened had ended, but Ethan's story had only begun. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains like an unwanted guest. Ethan hadn't slept. The tuxedo jacket still hung on the chair, the boutonniere wilted and brown. The room smelled faintly of roses and whiskey, the scent of what should have been the best night of his life. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, the letter still folded in his hand. He had read it so many times that the creases were starting to tear. Every line echoed in his head, louder than the silence around him. He didn't cry anymore. He couldn't. He just stared ahead, empty, like something inside him had turned off. Ryan knocked softly before entering. "Hey," he said. His voice was careful, the kind you use when you're afraid the person in front of you might break. Ethan didn't respond. Ryan sighed and set a cup of coffee beside him. "It's been 12 hours, man. You gotta eat something." Ethan looked down at the cup, then back up. You ever think about how one person can just stop showing up and everything still keeps moving? Ryan leaned against the dresser. "Yeah. Life's cruel like that. She said she loved me." Ethan whispered. "Then she left me in front of everyone I know." How does love do that? Ryan didn't have an answer. He just looked away. 2 weeks passed. The news of the canceled wedding spread like smoke through their small town. Everyone had a version of the story. Some said Anna ran off with someone else. Some said she got cold feet. Others said Ethan pushed too hard. Ethan stopped leaving his apartment. The invitations still lay in a pile by the door, unopened. The flowers he'd brought home to brighten the mood had long since died. Every night he sat on the couch, reading the letter again. He'd memorized every curve of her handwriting, every comma. Some nights he'd whisper replies, as if she could still hear him. "Why didn't you just tell me?" He'd say into the dark. "We could have fixed it. We could have tried." The silence always answered back. One evening, his mother came by. She was the only one brave enough to knock. "Sweetheart," she said softly, standing in the doorway with a small casserole dish. "You can't stay like this forever." Ethan smiled without humor. Forever feels shorter every day. She walked in and set the dish down. "She's not the only person who loved you, you know." "I know," he said. "But she's the only one who promised to stay." His mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She just sat beside him and held his hand. For a long time, they didn't speak. When she finally left, she slipped a small box on the table, the wedding rings. Ethan stared at them for a long time. Then he opened the box and took hers out, a thin silver band engraved inside with 2 words, "Always Us." He pressed it against his chest. It was supposed to be. he whispered. A few days later, Ryan convinced him to step outside. Come on, man. Fresh air, coffee. You can't just rot away. Ethan sighed but followed him anyway. They ended up at a small cafe on Main Street, the same one where Ethan had first met Anna 3 years ago. He hadn't been back since. The smell of roasted beans hit him like a memory. He could still see her, messy hair, sketchbook in hand, doodling on napkins while he tried to start a conversation. Ryan ordered for both of them and sat across from him. So, any plans? Work, maybe? Ethan shrugged. I took some time off. My boss was at the wedding. Or the not wedding. Ryan gave a sympathetic nod. You should maybe write something. Get it out of your head. Ethan looked up. Right. Yeah. You used to journal all the time. Remember college? You'd write about everything. Maybe it'll help. That night, Ethan opened his old leather notebook. The pages smelled of dust and coffee stains. He tore out the first few and started writing. Not about the pain. Not about her leaving. But about how she used to hum when she cooked. How she always left one sock mismatched on purpose. How she used to say forever like she actually believed in it. He wrote until the sun came up. Days turned into weeks. Writing became a ritual. Not to forget her, but to hold on to the parts that still made him feel alive. He filled pages with questions she'd never answer. Were you scared? Did you cry too? Do you still think of me when it rains? He never sent them, but it didn't matter. The notebook became his confession booth. One evening, as he was writing near the window, he saw a letter slip under his door. No knock, no footsteps, just silence. He froze, then stood heart racing. He picked it up. The envelope was plain white, but the handwriting stopped him cold. It was Anna's. He tore it open, hands trembling. Ethan, I don't know if I have the right to write you again. Maybe I shouldn't, but I need you to know that I didn't disappear to hurt you. I left because I had to. There are things I couldn't say in that first letter. Things that would have destroyed you if you knew them then. You think I left because of fear, but it wasn't that simple. The truth is, I'm sick, Ethan. I've been sick for months. I didn't tell you because I didn't want our love to turn into pity. The doctors said it might go away. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. But it didn't. I thought if I married you, you'd spend the next few years watching me fade. And I couldn't do that to you. Not you. Please understand. Leaving you was the only way I could love you without ruining you. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry for everything. Anna, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The letter trembled in his hands. For a moment, the room spun. He sat down on the floor, clutching the paper. He reread it again. And again. Every word hit like a knife. He wanted to hate her. For keeping this from him. For taking away his choice to stay. But he couldn't. Because even in her absence, even in her lie, there was love. Tears slipped down his cheeks, silent and steady. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Why didn't you let me stay? Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The rain started to fall, tapping against the window in soft, rhythmic beats. Almost like her knock used to sound when she'd come over late. He sat there for hours, letter pressed to his chest, listening to the storm. At midnight, he opened his notebook again. This time, he didn't write about her laughter or her eyes. He wrote, You left so I could live. But what's living if you're gone? He closed the notebook, placed both letters inside, and whispered to the empty room, Then let me love you in memory, Anna. That's all I have left. The candle on the table flickered and went out. 3 days passed since the second letter. Ethan hadn't told anyone about it. Not his mother, not Ryan. It felt like something sacred. Something that belonged only to him and Anna. He read it every morning like scripture and every night like a punishment. Her words replayed in his mind. Leaving you was the only way I could love you without ruining you. He couldn't stop wondering where she was. Was she in the hospital? Was she in another city? Was she even still alive? The questions kept him awake until dawn. On the fourth morning, he made a decision. He packed a small bag, grabbed his car keys and drove. No destination, no plan, just roads and silence. Sometimes you don't know where you're going until the road tells you. He took the old highway that led to the coast, the place Anna used to dream about. She'd always said, "If I ever disappear, I'd go somewhere the ocean can drown out my thoughts." So that's where he went. The drive took 6 hours. The sky turned gray, soft rain brushing the windshield. The sea came into view, endless, restless, wild. Ethan parked near a quiet stretch of beach and got out. The salty air hit him, sharp and clean. He walked down the shore, shoes sinking into wet sand, waves touching his ankles. The horizon looked like forever. He sat down on a driftwood log and pulled out her letters again. They were wrinkled now, smudged by tears and fingerprints. He reread them under the gray sky until the ink looked like veins spreading across paper. When the wind picked up, a small folded piece of paper slipped out from between the letters. One he hadn't noticed before. His heart jumped. It was stuck behind the first page of her second letter. He unfolded it carefully. It was short, written in hurried strokes. "If you ever need to find me, follow the sound of the waves at sunset. You'll know." Ethan stared at the words, his pulse quickening. Follow the sound of the waves at sunset. What did that even mean? Was it metaphorical or real? He looked up. The sun was beginning to dip, bleeding gold into the horizon. The waves grew louder, rougher, crashing against the rocks near the far end of the beach. Something inside him said go. He walked toward the sound. The air grew colder, and the rocks slippery beneath his shoes. There, tucked between two cliffs, was a small, weathered cottage overlooking the sea. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. His breath caught. He climbed the narrow path, heart racing. When he reached the door, he hesitated. His hand trembled above the handle. Then he knocked. The door opened slowly. A woman stood there, older, thinner, her hair tied back, a wool blanket around her shoulders. For a moment, he didn't recognize her, but then she looked up, and her eyes, those eyes. "Anna?" he whispered. She froze. Her lips parted in shock. "Ethan." They stood there for a long time, words trapped between disbelief and longing. "I didn't think you'd come," she said finally, voice barely audible. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he replied. Inside, the cottage smelled of salt, wood, and lavender. There were paintbrushes in a jar, unfinished canvases against the wall, seascapes, sunsets, the kind of things she used to paint when she was happy. Ethan looked around quietly. "You've been living here? For a few months?" she said softly. "It's quiet. The doctors are nearby." He turned to her. "You lied to me?" She nodded. "I know. You made me hate myself for something I didn't do. You made me think I wasn't enough. I couldn't let you see me fade, Ethan." Her voice broke. "You love with your whole soul. You would have spent every day trying to save me, and I couldn't let that be your life." Ethan clenched his fists. "That was my choice to make, Anna, not yours." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't understand. I didn't want you to love me out of pity. I wanted you to remember me as I was, not as someone dying in front of you." His anger melted into pain. "I would have loved you even then," he whispered, "maybe even more." She turned away, walking toward the window. The sea stretched endlessly before her. "I know," she said. "That's what made it unbearable." But for a long time, neither spoke. The waves filled the silence. Ethan finally broke it. "How bad is it?" Anna smiled sadly. "Some days are good. Some days I forget my own name." He swallowed hard. "And today's good," she said. "You're here." He stepped closer. "Anna, I don't know how much time you have left, but if you'll let me, I want to be here. I don't care about what's coming. I just want to be where you are." She turned to face him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Ethan, you shouldn't stay. When I go, it'll destroy you all over again." He took her hands gently. "You already destroyed me once. The least you can do is let me choose this time." Her lips trembled. "I'm scared. So am I," he said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." That night, they sat outside the cottage wrapped in blankets, watching the sea. The moon rose slowly, turning the waves silver. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to paint this view," she said, "but the real thing's always better." He smiled faintly. "You always said sunsets are proof that endings can be beautiful." She closed her eyes. "Maybe this one will be too." Ethan looked at her. The faint color in her cheeks, the way her hair danced in the wind, the quiet strength in her breathing. She looked fragile, but for the first time in months, she looked peaceful. He wanted to freeze that moment forever. But time never listens to love. Hours later, when the wind grew colder, Anna whispered, "Promise me something." "Anything," he said. "When I'm gone, don't build a life around my memory. Build it around the love that made you better." He closed his eyes, fighting back tears. "You're asking for too much." "I know," she said, smiling faintly. "But you always gave me more than I deserved." She rested her head against his chest. The waves crashed softly below. And for the first time since the wedding that never happened, Ethan didn't feel angry. He didn't feel lost. He just felt her heartbeat, faint but real, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks. The sea became their clock, tides rising and falling like breaths. Every morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of waves and the faint smell of lavender tea. Anna would already be outside, sitting on the wooden steps, wrapped in her shawl, staring at the horizon like she was waiting for something only she could see. Some days she was strong enough to walk along the beach. Some days she wasn't, but she smiled anyway, always smiled. Ethan started painting again, the same hobby he had abandoned years ago. Anna had taught him how to mix colors back in college, saying, "Life's easier when you can turn pain into art." Now, as she watched him paint, she would quietly say, "Don't forget to leave space for light, even in the darkest shades." It became their routine: silence, waves, paint, tea, and love that no longer needed words. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled, shaking the cottage windows. Rain lashed against the glass like furious hands. Ethan was setting up candles when he heard Anna coughs, deep, harsh, and endless. He rushed to her side. Her hands were trembling, her breath shallow. Hey," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "Slow down. Just breathe with me." She smiled weakly. "Still bossy, aren't you?" He tried to laugh, but his chest ached. He held her hand until the coughing eased. Her skin was cold. Too cold. "You need to go back to the doctor," he said firmly. "I already know what they'll say," she murmured. "Why waste the little time we have?" "Because I can't lose you again." Anna looked at him softly. "You never really lost me, Ethan. You just stopped believing that love could survive distance." He shook his head. "Don't talk like that." But she only smiled, eyes half closed. "You always were terrible at goodbye." That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the lightning dance over the sea. Ethan joined her, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "You remember the first time you told me you loved me?" she asked suddenly. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, you laughed at me." "I was scared," she admitted. "You said it so easily, like it wasn't something that could break you." "It did," he whispered, "and I'd still say it again." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's what makes it beautiful." They sat there in silence, thunder echoing above. Outside the storm raged, but inside there was only warmth. Two souls clinging to a moment they both knew wouldn't last. When the morning came, the world was washed clean. The sky was pale blue, the air sharp and fresh. Anna wanted to walk to the shore. Ethan helped her down the steps slowly, one arm around her waist. The beach was quiet, wet sand glistening like glass. They walked until she stopped, gazing at the horizon. "If I disappear again," she said softly, "promise me you won't come looking." Ethan frowned. "Don't. I mean it," she said, turning to face him. "If I go, let it be my choice. Let it be peaceful." His voice cracked. "I can't promise that." She reached up, touched his cheek. "Then promise you'll keep living." He looked into her eyes, pale, tired, but still glowing with that familiar stubborn light. "I'll try," he whispered. "That's enough," she said, smiling faintly. They stood there for a long time, the waves brushing their feet, the sun climbing higher. It felt like goodbye even though neither said it. The days grew shorter. Anna's body grew weaker. She began to forget little things. What day it was, where she left her brush, sometimes even his name. But she never forgot the sea. Every time she looked at it, she would whisper, "It's still beautiful." Ethan took care of everything, cooking, cleaning, reading to her at night. He even sang sometimes, though his voice trembled with tears. One evening, while he was painting her portrait, she fell asleep in the chair. The sunset light touched her face, golden and soft. For a moment, she looked like she wasn't sick at all, just peaceful, free. He wanted to keep that moment forever, so he painted until the light faded. When he was done, he looked at the canvas, her smile, her calmness, her soul, and broke down, because he knew it was the last one he'd ever paint. The next morning, Ethan woke up to silence. No sound of tea being made. No gentle hum of a tune. Just the waves, steady, endless. He called her name softly. No answer. She was still in bed, eyes closed, face turned toward the window. The morning light fell across her features like a final blessing. He touched her hand, cold. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. The world went quiet, even the sea. It felt like the earth itself was holding its breath with him. Then he whispered, voice breaking, "You promised me one more sunrise." But she didn't wake. They buried her on the hill overlooking the water, her favorite view. The locals helped. They didn't ask questions. They could tell from his eyes that this wasn't just loss. It was the end of a lifetime that had only lasted a few years. Ethan placed her paintbrushes beside the grave and a small shell they'd found on their first walk there. He stood in the wind until the sun went down. As darkness fell, he whispered, "You got your sunset, Anna." And it was beautiful. That night, he sat alone by the sea, the waves whispering in the dark. He remembered what she'd said. "Build your life around the love that made you better." He didn't know what that meant yet. All he knew was that the world felt quieter now, not empty, just quieter. Like her absence had left space for something new to grow. He took out his sketchbook and began to draw. The sea, the cottage, her smile. Every stroke felt like breathing again. And somewhere between grief and gratitude, Ethan realized maybe she hadn't really gone. Maybe love doesn't disappear. Maybe it just changes shape. A month passed. The sea was still there, loud, endless, alive. But Ethan had changed. The first few days after Anna's funeral, he couldn't move. He stayed in the cottage, sitting in silence, staring at the spot where she used to sit. Her scarf still hung on the chair. Her paintbrushes still smelled faintly of salt and lavender. Every night, he found himself talking to her, not in madness, but in memory. He'd say things like, "You missed another sunrise," or, "The tide's rough today, you'd have loved it." And sometimes when the wind hit the window just right, it almost felt like she answered. But grief has strange seasons. After enough silence, the world starts whispering again. One morning, Ethan woke up before dawn. The sea was calm, the sky painted with streaks of purple and blue. Something inside him shifted. For the first time, the air didn't hurt to breathe. He walked to the hill where she was buried. The grass had grown around the grave, dotted with wildflowers. He sat down and said quietly, "You were right, Anna. The sunrise is beautiful." He stayed there until the light filled the sky, then stood up and whispered, "I'll keep living, like you asked." That day, he packed a few things, her letters, his sketchbook, and one of her seashells, and left the cottage. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to carry her somewhere new. He drove until the coast faded behind him, replaced by forests and towns. Every few days, he'd stop at small art galleries or seaside cafes, sketching strangers, selling paintings. His art started to change, less dark, more alive. He painted children chasing waves, lovers holding hands under streetlights, old couples feeding birds in the park. People began asking about his work. One gallery owner in Portland said, "Your paintings feel like loss and peace had a baby." Ethan laughed softly. That's about right. He didn't tell anyone about Anna, but she was in every brushstroke, hidden in the colors, whispered in the light. Months passed like that. One evening, he found himself at a small-town fair by the ocean. The place was filled with laughter, music, food, kids running with balloons. He stood by a stall selling handmade jewelry when someone tapped his shoulder. Ethan. He turned. It was Ryan, his best friend, the one who'd stood by him at the wedding that never was. Ryan? Ethan blinked, half in shock. I can't believe it's you, Ryan said, grinning. Man, I thought you disappeared off the face of the earth. Ethan smiled faintly. I kind of did. They sat by the pier, talking for hours. Ryan listened quietly as Ethan told him everything. The letters, the cottage, Anna's last days. When Ethan finished, Ryan didn't speak for a while. Finally, he said, She'd loved you, man. But I think she'd want you to do more than survive. You've got something people need. Your art, your story. Ethan nodded slowly. I don't even know where to start. Ryan smiled. Start where she left you, at the sea. So Ethan returned. A year after she died, he drove back to that same beach. The cottage was still there, weathered but standing. The windows creaked, the garden wild, but it felt like home. He spent days cleaning, repairing, and painting the walls white again. Then he hung his paintings, all the ones inspired by Anna, on those walls. By summer, he opened it to the public. A hand-painted sign outside read, The Sunset House, a gallery for the love that stayed. Locals came first, curious, quiet, then travelers, then reporters. Word spread online. A mysterious seaside artist turns grief into light. People who'd lost someone would visit, sometimes crying quietly in front of his paintings. Ethan never said much. He just listened. He realized something. Everyone carries a love story that ended too soon. And sometimes, sharing it helps you breathe again. One afternoon, while cleaning the porch, he noticed a young girl sitting near the steps, sketching the sea. She couldn't have been more than 10. He smiled. That's a beautiful drawing. She looked up shyly. My mom says the ocean talks if you listen. He nodded. She's right. The girl tilted her head. Do you think people we love can hear us when they're gone? Ethan thought for a long moment. I think they never really go anywhere, he said softly. They just become part of the things that remind us to keep going. She smiled, then went back to drawing. As Ethan watched her, he realized Anna would have loved this. The sea, the laughter, the healing. This was her dream, a place where love didn't die with people. That night, he stood by her grave under the stars. The wind carried the scent of the ocean, the same one they'd breathed together. He said quietly, You were wrong about one thing, Anna. Endings can be beautiful, but beginnings can be too. He placed a new painting beside the headstone. One of the sea at sunrise, not sunset. Because this time, it wasn't about what ended. It was about what began again. Over the next few years, the Sunset House became more than a gallery. It became a sanctuary, a place for stories, memories, and love. Ethan started teaching art workshops, helping people paint their pain into beauty. He never remarried. He didn't need to. His heart wasn't empty, it was full of everything Anna left behind. Sometimes, when the sky turned orange and gold, he'd hear her voice in the wind. Don't forget to leave space for light. And he always did. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat on the porch with his sketchbook. He wrote one last line under his latest painting, for the wedding that never happened, but the love that never ended. He smiled, eyes glistening with peace. The waves whispered below. The wind carried her name. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel her absence. He felt her everywhere. 10 years later, the sea hadn't changed. It still roared, still whispered, still caught the golden light every evening, as if it were holding on to something sacred. Ethan sat on the same porch where he once painted with trembling hands. His hair had grayed at the temples, his eyes lined with time, but they still carried that same quiet light Anna once fell in love with. The Sunset House had grown. It wasn't just a gallery anymore. It was a place of stories. Every wall was covered with letters, love notes, apologies, unfinished promises, sent by people from around the world, each one addressed to someone they'd lost. Above them, painted in simple black letters, were Anna's words. Build your life around the love that made you better. That morning, the sky was soft blue. Ethan made a cup of tea, hers, lavender and mint, and sat down to write. The page before him was blank for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, he began, Dear Anna, it's been 10 years. I still wake up to the sound of the ocean. I still talk to you when the waves are loud. You'd laugh if you saw the place now. There's always someone crying or smiling, sometimes both at once. I think you'd like that. You'd say it feels human. I kept my promise. I built a life, not a memory. You're still here, but you're part of everything good I've done. Every painting, every person who walks through these doors, they carry a little of you with them. Sometimes, I wonder what you'd look like now. I imagine your hair streaked with gray, your eyes softer but still fierce. I like to think you'd still scold me for forgetting to eat when I paint. You were right about love, you know. It doesn't end. It just changes shape. You became the sound of the sea, the warmth of morning light, the space between each heartbeat. I used to think our story was a tragedy. Now I see it was a gift, a reminder that real love doesn't need a lifetime to be eternal. He paused, wiped a tear from his cheek, then smiled faintly. If there's a place beyond all this, I hope it's by the ocean. Because that's where I'll find you. He signed it simply yours, always. Ethan folded the letter and walked down to the shore. The waves were calm, the air thick with salt. He knelt, placed the letter in a small glass bottle, and sealed it. Then, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, he whispered, This one's for you, and threw it into the sea. The bottle bobbed, caught a current, and began drifting away, slowly, gracefully, until it disappeared into the gold-streaked water. He stood there long after it was gone, hands in his pockets, heart light and full. As twilight settled, visitors began arriving at the Sunset House for the annual Letters to the Sea night, a tradition Ethan started years ago. Every year, on the anniversary of Anna's passing, people gathered to write letters to the ones they'd lost. Hundreds of candles lined the beach. The glow reflected on the waves, turning the water into a sea of stars. Ethan watched quietly as strangers cried, hugged, and threw their letters into the tide. For a moment, he felt Anna beside him, not as a ghost, but as warmth, as air, as memory that lived. A little girl came up to him, the same one who once drew the ocean years ago, now a teenager with paint on her hands. Mr. Ethan, she said softly, Mom says your love story is the reason she started painting again. Ethan smiled. Then it was worth it. The girl hesitated, then handed him a folded piece of paper. I wrote something for you this year. He opened it. The note said, Love never leaves. It just waits for us to see it again. Ethan's eyes glistened. That's beautiful, he whispered. The girl smiled shyly. Mom says Anna would be proud of you. When the crowd left, Ethan sat alone by the water again. The last candle flickered beside him. The tide was gentle, brushing against his feet. He looked up at the stars. We made it, Anna, he said softly. We turned our pain into something that helps people. The wind stirred, and for just a moment, he thought he heard her laugh. Faint, familiar, carried through the waves. He smiled. Yeah, he said, closing his eyes. I'll be home soon, but not yet. He stayed like that for a long while, until the tide crept close enough to touch the candle. The flame flickered, once, twice, then went out. But in the darkness, the sky blazed with 1,000 tiny lights. Years later, after Ethan passed peacefully in his sleep, the Sunset House remained open. The locals kept it alive. The sea still whispered at its walls. On the wall above his favorite chair hung his final painting, one he finished days before he died. It showed two figures standing on the shore at sunset, hand in hand, smiling at the sea. And below it, in small, careful letters, was written, For Anna, the love that never left. Some say on quiet evenings, when When the tide is high and the air smells of lavender, you can still hear laughter echoing from the porch, soft, distant, eternal. Maybe it's just the wind. Or maybe it's love finding its way back home.